I'm here today, and it is April 29th, and I'm here with my wildcat, who is Tom Fryer, and he is in Manhattan, Kansas right now, and we are on audio FaceTime, and I am in Oklahoma City. How are you doing today?
I am doing fine, and I would add that I am your grandfather, right, besides your wildcat?
That is true.
Okay, good. Need to clarify that.
Okay, our first question is, when and where were you born?
When and where? Okay, I was born in Powell, Wyoming. The date was August 21st of 1940, like almost 78 years ago.
Is that where your family is originally from?
No, my family was born, my father was born in South Dakota in 1903, and my mother was born in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, also in 1903.
How did you come to live where you do now?
Well, after my parents were married, they first moved up to Montana, where my older sister was born, and then in the sometime in the 1930s, I don't remember the exact date, they moved to where I was born, Powell, Wyoming. My dad was a pharmacist. Had a Rexall drugstore, and my mother's aunt at the time, my mother's sister at the time, it was her. She was running the pharmacy, and she needed another pharmacist, so that's why my dad moved to Powell, Wyoming.
And when did you move to Manhattan, Kansas, where you live now?
We moved here in the summer of 1981.
And you came to Manhattan because of the Air Force?
Yes, I was still in the Air Force. It was my last Air Force assignment, and my assignment was with the university here, Kansas State University, and I was the head of the Air Force ROTC program for 3 years at K-State.
Okay. You already said a little bit about your family, but could you tell me a little bit about your parents or your family background?
Okay, well, like I say, I'll start with my father. His name was A.R. Fryer Jr. He was one of 10 brothers and sisters, and he grew up in eastern South Dakota, in Dolan, South Dakota was where he grew up. My grandfather was a farmer there, and then my dad went to college at South Dakota State Brookings, South Dakota, and that's where he became a pharmacist. And then I'll switch to my mother. What we called her Tittle Fryer. Her real name was Lydia Fryer, and she was born and raised in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, which is western Nebraska. Her father and mother had a florist there. And like I say, they were both born in 1903.
Okay. How many siblings do you have, and where are you in the lineup?
Okay, I'm the youngest. I just have an older sister. Her name is Marge Wilder. She lives in Cody, Wyoming.
Okay. Can you describe your childhood home and room?
Well, my parents in 1940 actually they built the home that I grew up with, and it was let me see. It was a one-story structure. It had a basement. It was an unfinished basement, and we had let me see. We had 3 bedrooms, but only 1 bath for everybody in the household. Have no idea how many square foot it was, but it was as I look back, it was very very adequate for our family at the time.
Okay. Can you describe the community you grew up in, your neighborhood?
Okay. Well, my neighborhood was we didn't have any rentals. They were all individually owned. The population of Powell at the time was probably it was less than 5,000. I'd say maybe even 3 or 4,000. But again, you have to realize the entire state of Wyoming is sparsely populated. So Powell, I think in these days, is maybe in one of the top 10 or 15 communities in the state of Wyoming. We only lived, well, my dad could walk to work. We were only, I think, 3 or 4 blocks from his drugstore, from the downtown area.
Okay. Can you remember any family traditions from your childhood?
Well, of course, we celebrated all the holidays, and then when my sister was older, and they had moved to a neighboring community, Cody, Wyoming, which was only like 23 miles away, about a half-hour drive, and so all the major holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas in particular, we would celebrate with them.
You didn't say with who?
And as far as
married?
As far as like Easter dinners and all, they were pretty traditional. We had our in our home we had a separate dining room, and I remember lots of family occasions around that dining room table. So.
Okay. What sort of discipline did your parents use when you were a child?
Well, they didn't have to discipline me because I was a pretty.
His mother talks about chasing him with a switch, and he went under the bed and she couldn't get him. But she couldn't remember what for.
We need to go back and delete that. Did you understand what she said?
Yes.
She leave it to Angie to ask my mom a question like that, because I have, I guess I did. I think I did get spanked a time or two, and I'm not really sure what it was all about. But anyway, there was no child abuse or anything like that. I didn't, my dad didn't get out his belt and whip me like I guess happened to some of my friends at the time.
Okay. Can you just describe your school or the education you received? I guess this is talking about elementary school, and then I think we'll get into college and stuff later.
Okay, very good. So, well, I went to, of course, well, our school system, even though the town of Powell was quite small, we had I guess it was a consolidated school district. We had a number of school buses. We had some of my classmates, I think, rolled in the school bus maybe 30, 45 minutes at least to come to school. I entered first grade in 1946. We had just one elementary school building then. I guess it was first. We didn't have kindergarten. I started first through sixth. Well, wait a minute. I went first through third in that one building, and then we built our second elementary school in the west part of town, and it was 4 or 5 blocks, I guess, from where where I lived. And so I went. I don't know if I went to 4th, 5th, and 6th grade there. I know at least I was the first group to go to 4th grade there, and then back to the kind of the area where the first elementary, the middle school, or the junior high and the high school. There were 3 separate buildings that were all together. So 7th and 8th grade, I was in that middle building, and then our high school building was. I went 9th grade through 12th there, and then graduated in. The year was 1958, I guess. So, and but the education we had a fairly, I guess I would say, prosperous school district. We had oil and gas in our area. In fact, as I recall, natural resources paid almost 50% of the revenue that came into the school district. So we could attract quality teachers and pay them good money, contrary to kind of what happens today in this day and age.
Do you remember liking school?
Yeah, I really did. It was, and I had Well, small classes. My high school graduating class was less than 100. I think there was something like 96 of us, and also, we knew each other. It was a pretty small group, and of course, I had a lot of friends that I would associate with. Even to this day, I mean, of course, as you realize, we go to reunions back up there about every 5 years now, and still stay in touch with them. So
That's good. As a child or young person, what sort of things did you do for fun?
Well, I had a bicycle when I was real young, and we used to, that was great. Well, not in the wintertime, but spring, summer, and fall, we used to ride our bikes a lot, and then and athletics was a big part of my life. And we didn't have all the choices for athletics that they have now. And I'm thinking primarily junior high and high school, but in the fall it was football, in the winter it was basketball, in the spring it was track, and then over the summer we didn't have baseball in school, but we had in the summertime an American Legion baseball team, and I played on that. So that took up a lot of my time, and my parents were very involved in the Presbyterian church there, and so went to church every Sunday. And I guess the other thing I would add to would be Boy Scouts. My best friend, his dad was our scoutmaster, and we would go camping every month of the year. In the heat of the summer or the cold, snowy winters, we would have campouts, and so that was again a big part of my life. And then Powell was located in northwest Wyoming, fairly close to Yellowstone Park, and so we would go into Yellowstone several times a year, I guess, to see all the sights and the wild animals and the glaciers and all that.
Did you always know you wanted to be a pilot, or what did you hope to be when you grew up when you were young?
Well, real young, I envisioned myself as a professional baseball player, but those dreams certainly went by the wayside. When I was in high school, I didn't. I wasn't thinking about Air Force or a pilot at that stage. It was after I graduated from high school. My first year, I went to the University of Wyoming at Laramie, and in those days it was a land grant school, so males had to be in either Army or Air Force ROTC. So I chose to get in Air Force ROTC, and that's kind of what sparked my interest in the Air Force, and later on going to pilot training.
Okay. When you were a teenager, did you date? Was that allowed?
Well, it was allowed, but I don't know if I was antisocial, but I didn't really have too many dates. I didn't have anybody that I was going steady with or anything like that. So.
Do you remember what dating was like then? Was it a lot different than it is these days?
Well, since Angie was that same age, maybe she could answer for her perspective. Yeah. Well, and also it seems like, even though I knew the girls that were in my class, there was one, I guess, that I dated kind of off and on, but it seemed like most of our class dated when we were seniors, the girls that were sophomores 2 years behind us for whatever reason.
Okay. How much education did you receive?
Well, I'll summarize and then give you the details if you want. So when I graduated from the Air Force Academy, that was my bachelor's degree. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science was my degree. That was in 1963. And then, of course, I was in the Air Force for 21 years, but I ended up with two master's degrees. I had, when Angie and I got married 50 years ago, back in 1968, we were living in Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, where Arizona State University is located. And I got my first master's degree there, which was Master of Science in Engineering, and then later on I had an assignment in Montgomery, Alabama, and I got an MBA, which was a master in Business Administration. So quite a bit from that was from Auburn University, but so quite a bit of education. And what I'm so blessed with is since I was involved in the Air Force, I didn't have all this student debt that people have now because it was all paid for by the Air Force.
Okay. After your education was complete, well, I guess you kind of did your education while you were working and stuff, but you did end up getting married, right?
Correct.
Where did you meet your spouse?
Okay, yeah. The year was 1968, and we actually met in her hometown of Abilene, Texas. She was a school teacher there. She had graduated from college in 1962 as a teacher, and so she was teaching there, and I was one weekend visiting a college friend, and we had a blind date, and that was our first date. And then like I say, she was there in Abilene, Texas. I was living in Arizona, and we got married that's August of 1968. We got married in Texas, but then we were living in Arizona.
Okay. How did you decide that this was the person you wanted to marry?
Good question. We were, well, of course, with me being born in 1940, I was 27 going on 28, as was Angie. So we were, we had both been around and of course had dated and all that. And it was kind of love at first sight, I guess. So, she was one of the Texas sweethearts. I guess I never really had married or met somebody from Texas, and so she really swayed me.
So you said you guys have been married for 50 years this year?
And we were married in August of 68, so this August in another couple months will be our 50th wedding anniversary.
What advice would you give to someone thinking of getting married?
Good question.
Politicians always say that.
First get married for the right reasons, and probably maybe not to
be old enough.
Yeah, to be old enough not to maybe even to date around, to make sure again it's for the right reasons, and also to be able to afford to get married, and to be able to find a decent place to live, have a good job and all that, and support you and your wife, and maybe later on your children.
Okay. Did you have children? If so, how many?
We had two. Your father, Wesley, was well. Okay, we were married in 68. Your father was born in August of 70, and then 7 years later, we have a daughter. Her name is Trudy, and she was born in 1977. So we have the two children, a son and a daughter.
Okay. What was the most satisfying thing about raising children?
The most satisfying thing.
The most challenging is coming up next.
Well, I was going to mention the challenge and all, but as anybody will tell you, once they have their first child, it kind of changes your life forever in terms of your perhaps social schedule and what all's involved. But I guess as I
doesn't know what you're going to tell.
As I look back on my life, one of the most satisfying things was my family. Having a loving wife and a son and a daughter that we just got along well together. They did well in school and have done well in life, and so that's been what's been very satisfying.
What about challenging?
Challenging. Oh, well, of course, for the first part of my life, from '63 through '84, I guess. For
what was challenging about having children?
Pardon?
You said what was challenging about having children.
Well, I'm trying to explain that. For 21 years, the challenges of children and an Air Force life was being able to be a good Air Force officer, and yet to be able to find time to come home and to be a good husband and a good father, and have time to spend with my children, because sometimes work takes precedence over family, and sometimes kids don't really get to know their fathers. So I'd say that was a big challenge.
Yeah. What values did you think it was important to teach your children, or do you think it's important to teach your grandchildren?
Well, when I think of values, I think a lot of what I learned as a Boy Scout. There's the Boy Scout law, but again, as far as being trusty and trustworthy and honest, being able to well, let me think. Of course, the Scout law: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, thrifty, cheerful, brave, clean, and reverent. Those 12 things have kind of formed my set of values, if you want, and I hope in some way or another I've passed those along to both my 2 children and my 5 grandchildren.
Did you establish family traditions of your own once you got married and had kids?
Oh, I guess we did. I mean, we both grew up in good families. Not single family or single parent families. We both had a mom and a dad, and they stress some of the values that we've grown up with. And I mean, they were both loyal, devoted church members, and that we learned values that way as well. So,
do you have any heirlooms or items that are especially significant to you from either your parents or anything like that?
Heirlooms. Oh.
Or from your life?
Well, we have some
silver dollars.
Yeah, I guess in our safety deposit box we've got some silver dollars that came from my days in Wyoming when I grew up. I never had for many years seen a paper dollar. We always had silver dollars, and we've still got that as part of our collection. We've got some artwork in the house that are mountain pictures, because I've between 19 years and
something from your parents or something.
Yeah.
Inherited.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really think of anything else in particular.
Okay. This is kind of a broad question, but is there any event in your life that stands out as being very challenging? Or, life-changing, not challenging.
Well, when I got married, that was life-changing. Up until then, I was an officer in the Air Force, and I guess, living a single life and then becoming married and have children, that was life-changing. I think one of the, and I don't know if this fits in with what you're asking, but I was very fortunate in June of 1963 when I graduated from the Air Force Academy. I got to shake the hand of our president, who at the time was President John F. Kennedy, and I've got a picture of that I, in fact, my son Wesley was the one that found the negative and made that into a picture that I've always treasured and remembered. That was a very significant event in my life.
Was your family affected by the Great Depression?
They were not as much, and I regret not really having talked that much to my mom and dad. I know in the early 30s. I'm trying to think now. My parents were born in or married in the late 20s, and were living, I know, in Montana. My dad was had jobs. I mean, he had graduated from college with his degree in pharmacy, so he had a good paying job, and so we didn't suffer as much as so many Americans did. And I think part of it too was the part of the country we're living in. I mean, we're living in a big city. I mean, not the cities, but the towns in both Montana and Wyoming where we lived were not that big. But as a result, they were not as affected by the Great Depression as maybe you've seen pictures of from that era, from the big cities of New York and Chicago, etc.
So what wars did you serve in?
The war that I served in was the Vietnam War. The year was 1966, so I was 3 years out of the Air Force Academy and 2 years out of pilot training. I was stationed, but I was not stationed in South Vietnam. I was flying missions with the Air Force, but I was actually based in a neighboring country of Thailand.
Okay, so you were a pilot during that time?
Yes, I was a pilot, and during that war, I was flying the F-4C Phantom.
And what do you remember of that experience?
Well, it's something that I'll remember till for the rest of my life. The flying in combat, the stress of it, the camaraderie, the people I flew with. We were probably a band of brothers that were facing the same stress and all that. And I was only over there for about 6 months because I was flying my missions over North Vietnam, and as soon as we completed 100 missions, we got to come home. So I got there in June and got home in December of 66.
Okay, did you participate in, or do you have any memories of any of the movements that came out of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, such as the Civil Rights Movement or the Women's Liberation Movement?
Well, of course, I didn't participate in any of that. I mean, I was aware of it. And of course, that was in the early days of television and the coverage, and of course we would see it in the nightly news. But as far as participating with it, I did not.
But you do remember those movements while they were happening?
Oh, I sure do. And in fact, one of the times, and this is trying to think the exact. I guess it was the late 70s. We were living in Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama, and actually had driven through Selma, Alabama, where one of the civil rights movements had crossed the bridge down there. Now, that was a very significant place, and Selma was not all that far from Montgomery, Alabama, where we were living.
I know your parents were born in the United States, but were their parents immigrants, or were their parents from the United States also?
They were U.S. citizens as well. Well, I'm thinking on my dad's side first of all. His father. Angie, I need your help on this. I think his father had been born in New York. I think my grandmother on that side had been born in, I was going to say Illinois. They lived in Illinois, but I'm not sure. And then on my mother's side, I can't really remember where she lived. I mean, we can go back not to my grandparents, but I think either great or
Your great grandfather was born in England.
yeah, great grandfather was born in England. That would have been on my father's side.
Okay.
Both father and mother.
Both father and mother. And those were great greats.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And that's good to know.
And then, well,
Sorry,
and then
keep
my wasn't somebody born in Germany or in Europe?
I wasn't on that side of the family.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'll go back to that side of the family.
We can come back to that in just a second, as
Okay.
because we're in the study and Angie's looking it up on her computer.
Okay. Do you
Okay,
remember? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll come back to that in a
Do you
minute.
remember your first contact with such significant inventions as the television or the computer?
Well, let me start with the
Okay, let me say your grandmother was born. Your grandmother Deborah Tompkins was born in Ireland.
yeah. This would be on my mother's side that her mother was born in Ireland.
Okay. So that's your great grandmother.
That's his great grandmother.
Great.
Yeah, that'd be my
One
great.
great.
Yeah, one great.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, they were immigrants if you go far enough back, but not my grandparents. It was either greats or great greats.
Okay. So the television or the computer?
Okay, TV. The years were the 1950s when I was in high school. As I mentioned earlier, I graduated in high school in 1958, but I remember this would probably be the mid 50s. We were starting to get TV, but it was black and white TV. We didn't have cable vision or anything else. My sister, who lived, as I mentioned earlier, in Cody, Wyoming, they had I can't remember the right description, but anyway, they got better TV, and they were the ones that got color TV before we did. So, but I remember the days of black and white computers. Yes, I remember in fact, the first computer I got, I think, was maybe in the early 80s.
Okay. How would you say the world or your country has changed since you were a child?
That may take from now till midnight to
Briefly.
talk about. Briefly, huh? Well, it's changed remarkably a lot. I would maybe talk about as far as TV. Back to your earlier comment, as far as family values, I don't think family values are quite as much respected now as they were then.
The same family.
Yeah, but again, well, and transportation. Not in my lifetime, but my parents' lifetime. When I mentioned they were born in 1903, that's when the Wright brothers had the first flight in an airplane. And of course, look what airplanes and transportation are in this day and age, let alone automobiles and you just name it. There's just kind of across the board. There's been so much changes, and generally for the better. I mean, there's some negatives to it as well.
Okay.
Excuse me.
What has provided you the most satisfaction in your life? What are you most proud of?
I would say one word, and that's my family. I feel truly blessed to have the family that I've had, to have lived in the places we have. As I talk to you right now from our current location, and being able to have a retirement complex like Meadowlark to be able to live with, but. I go back to my original thing. It's just been the joy I get from my family, my extended family.
Okay. And then our last question. From your life experience, is there any advice you would give to someone my age?
Oh, probably a lot of things. The old Bible thing as far as honoring your father and your mother, but and seeking their advice. The value of education. I mean, our back to earlier question when you're asking about changes, and I mean what they're teaching these days in colleges and all, as rapidly as changes occur. There's been people saying that the jobs that we know now may not even exist in another 10 or 20 years. And so, if you want to be a productive member of our society, you need to adapt to those changes, and education goes a long ways. And wherever you find out you want to work and be a productive citizen, a good work ethic, coming to work on time, doing your best, et cetera, et cetera. I guess those would be the primary things.
Okay, well, thank you for taking time out of your day to let me interview you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Let me add one last thing too, and
Okay.
this came from our church. The last couple of Sundays, the minister's been talking about the meaning of life and the purpose of life, and he was talking today about legacy, and he divided legacy into a personal legacy and a public legacy. And somebody asks me what my purpose in life, and I think he just hit it on the nail on the head in terms of my personal legacy. I view as my family and those around me. What we've done, and the fact that my son is happily married and has three wonderful children, my grandchildren, and then similarly with my daughter, who is happily married and has two little boys that are doing very well. That's on the personal side. And on the public side, as far as a legacy, and especially now that I'm retired, the ability to volunteer and to give back to a community, I see that as an important thing. That or as the minister was saying today at a funeral, what would you like the minister and maybe your friends to say about you? What is your legacy, and were you a good citizen, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, a little bit about legacy and some philosophy there, I guess.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.
Well, and you've asked some excellent questions, some tough questions, and I hope I've given you some decent answers. So.